Racing games. A staple of gaming, harkening back to the times of arcades, and has cemented itself as one of the main genres of gaming. And it really began to pique my interest as I recently became a mega fan of Formula 1, watching it live on YouTube, knowing all driver names like I was a dad in his 40s watching football. It made me feel like I wanted to play racing games, and that's when I got disappointed. Current F1 games are apparently bad, the Forza Motorsport franchise really sucks, whilst the Horizon series seems to be at best divisive or maybe okay. Gran Turismo is also not in a good spot, NASCAR also doesn't seem to be in the best of places, the Burnout series is dead alongside with Midnight Club and countless more. Hell, just racing games in general apparently all suck. My disappointment made me look to a certain game, in a certain franchise I hold near and dear. Need for Speed, which is to me the racing game franchise, which while not being as disliked as many of the others is still far from its peak, with many of its fans still reminiscing about a game from 2005 that also was their best selling 20 years ago. But I'm not here to do yet another video about Most Wanted because that was not the peak of Need for Speed. Instead, it was another game, one 4 years later, in 2009. Need for Speed Shift was developed by the newly founded Slightly Mad Studios, and not the typical developer of the franchise, EA Black Box. Ever since Most Wanted, the series had been slowly declining, and so they changed course, ditching the lawlessness and instead focusing on normal legal racing like Forza and Gran Turismo. But they weren't going to just make a sim racer with the Need for Speed name. Instead, they were going to do something else. Now I hear you asking, what is it making this game in particular the best one? Is it my nostalgia? Yes it is. It is nostalgia. Sort of. You see, I mostly grew up playing PS4 and the Xbox 360, on which I had three main racing games I played a lot, which was Burnout Paradise City, Forza Motorsport 4, the one with the good Top Gear.
Why, it's Osama bin Laden!
And of course, the subject of this video, Need for Speed Shift. And that was the one I played the most of. So yes, nostalgia is a part of me saying it's the best one. A big part, but still just a part, because there are much more making the game great, and the first is even in the title. But first, a slight tangent. Me suddenly becoming a massive F1 fan made me realize something. Racing
Hello, Crofty. Hello.
is kinda dangerous. Not that I was under any notion that it was safe, I knew it had and still does kill drivers and at times spectators in horrifyingly brutal ways. But I was always under the impression that crashes in general or non-lethal accidents were far from common in modern times, except for maybe in NASCAR. But seeing just how often it did, and does occur in F1, made me look into other motorsports and it checks out. I'm mentioning all of this to say that modern and probably most racing games in general don't really capture it. And it's something Need for Speed Shift absolutely nails. And it does so at first with speed. The insane sense of speed this game conveys is the best and main part that makes the game my favorite racing game. You might not be going as fast as they do in F1 or other racing games, but when you are pushing 300 kilometers, it's terrifying and you could be fooled to think it's at least twice the speed, if not more. And the most interesting part is how it does so with just some small and quite easy implemented things. But there is a catch. As you might have noticed, I'm almost always using just one viewing mode, the cockpit. Not that using third person or hood view makes the game not good, but it does make it not as good. Much of the marketing was all about the new cockpit and how it was so good. And still, 1.5 decades later, it still holds up along with the game's overall graphics. In order to capture that sense of speed, when you go fast enough, the game blurs out the dashboard instruments and other parts in order to create a tunnel vision effect that occurs in real life when reaching a certain amount of speed. Your own character, or in this case camera, reacts to the G-forces when accelerating or braking, and in top-end cars you can really feel that power and G-force. The game is also a bit shaky, which could just be because of the tracks, or could be over-exaggerated, but it does help in creating that sense of danger and speed. Again, these are on their own quite simple things, but when combined they create what might be one of, if not the best first-person driving experience outside of VR, although I haven't tried it, so who knows. But there's still one more cherry on the top, creating that sense of speed and danger, and it's the audio. And good god, it is something. I have no idea how realistic it is, considering even the lowest end cars can sound so devastating. But I'm not complaining. I mean, just listen to the raw power of the Pagani Zonda.
Green, go, go, go.
The first time I used it, it genuinely scared me, as it sounded more like an unearthly monster than a car, but in a good way. I think the sound design might easily be up there, or maybe still better than current modern AAA racing games. And so that is how the game nails that speed in Need for Speed, and helps create that dangerous and intense feeling. But there's still one last thing I haven't mentioned, and it's something they marketed pretty hard. When you crash in most games, it's not really that scary or intense, mostly annoying. The most scary could be the car flipping over or visually being damaged, but you the driver is always fine and unscathed. But in Need for Speed Shift, you are not safe. When going fast enough and crashing at the right angle, it's scary, as your character reacts to the violent G-forces, groaning in pain, breathing heavily, hearing your heartbeat, and the screen becoming black and white. The danger of driving is just not in the gameplay and feel, but it's also the game's personality. After completing a race and seeing your stats and rewards, the display comes crashing in looking like broken or cracked glass. Even when not in racing, the game really tries to make it all seem so dangerous, dark and gritty, whilst all you are really doing is just looking at your car or choosing the next racer tier. And then there's of course the cutscenes.
The best drivers, the most powerful cars, the highest stakes.
The game does on the occasion show you informational cutscenes, and they are trying so hard to be extreme and dangerous, whilst also trying to be professional at the same time. You could say the whole game feels a little bit edgelordy and maybe even a bit corny for trying to be so serious, and I love it. It's quite charming and it really gives it a unique personality that it commits to, in both gameplay and its presentation. Now, about the gameplay, the thing making it a game. It's actually quite simple and straightforward. In Need for Speed Shift, you only have one goal, to climb from tier 1 and all the way to the Need for Speed League, and win it. That's it. There's no story, no characters, just driving. Depending on what you want from a racing game, it's probably either fine or maybe the biggest letdown in the game. I'm one of those who prefers driving over story in racing games, so to me it doesn't really bother me. The game starts with you testing out a car and then racing it. Depending on how you place, you'll get different amounts of money to buy your first tier 1 car. But it also affects how the game recommends you to play the game, like AI difficulty and assistance, which also can anytime after the tutorial change. It's really simple, straightforward, and most importantly, quick, so if you want to replay it from the start, it's not a problem, and it's probably one of my favorite video game tutorials. Throughout your campaign, you will primarily be doing 4 modes. You have your standard racing and time trials. Time trials do however get interesting considering all the other drivers are also at the same time trying to achieve the best lap. So you can and will often run into them, so they can affect your time, or you can use that to sabotage their time. Third is drifting, and fourth is car battle. Car battles is a one-on-one duel being a best of 3, and it's probably easily the best one. When it's a close one, it can really require you to drive to your absolute limits, considering that if one of the drivers gets 5 seconds ahead of the other, the one behind automatically loses. So messing up is much more punishing, and it creates fear when going fast, and also encourage you to maybe drive a bit more dirty. The progression in this game is based around stars. To unlock new tiers, the game will require you to have a certain amount of stars, which you get primarily by just placing good and driving. But it's not the only way. And this is where the game drops the sim racing facade and reveals its true self. You see, to get to the maximum amount of stars, you need to complete challenges that can be divided into 2 categories. If you go for being a clean driver, it means you avoid crashing and just simply drive good, corner good, etc. The aggressive one, however, is what makes the game more unique. Instead of trying to corner good and avoid the other drivers, you do the opposite, sliding around and just being a nuisance, crashing into other drivers and cause them to get off the track. It's not only tolerated, but encouraged and rewarded with stars. This takes what on the surface is trying to be a sim race and makes it into something else, and in my opinion, much more fun. I think this works the best on starts in high tier racing. As the tier gets higher, there are more drivers per race. When the lights go green, it quickly becomes mayhem and more of a challenge to simply survive the first few corners and straights. And because you can't rewind and only start over if you mess it up, it's quite tense and makes you really think about your decisions on the spot. And as for the driving of the cars, it's pretty good. They feel heavy, powerful, but also quite nimble, especially the higher the tier you get. To me, it's a good combination of being somewhat challenging to drive, but also not too challenging. And with the assistance customization, it is very easy to find the right handling that suits you best. Something noteworthy is just how punishing the game is if you don't stay on the track. If you go off it, your speed will dramatically decrease and it can be quite difficult to steer the car back on track. It doesn't sound like very much, but it does increase the risk and reward for ramming drivers off the road, and also increases the pressure for when those drivers try to ram you off the road too. And the AI is also not too bad. It could just be me being quite bad at the game considering I'm using mouse and keyboard, but I found the AI to be quite challenging whilst not being too challenging for me. But even so, like all games, it has its flaws. Like I said before, the game's campaign is quite lacking and can often feel like several disconnected races instead of feeling like a long campaign with you slowly climbing from an amateur racer to the world champion. Besides that, I don't really like the tracks. Not necessarily gameplay wise, but their aesthetics. They're just kinda boring. There are some good and iconic ones like Silverstone and Spa, and cooler ones like Racing in London. But other than that, most don't really have much of a unique or creative aesthetic, which while being a letdown is to be expected considering its sim racer aesthetics. And you will also be focusing on the road and not necessarily the environment itself surrounding it, so it's not a big problem. Car customization is also far from perfect. On the surface there are dozens of options to choose. One unique option for some cars is a works conversion. With it you can take a seemingly normal car and transform it into a racing beast in performance and looks. Although it can and does lead to some balancing issues, because for example this car counts as tier 1 but performs like a tier 4 one, and so it can easily be exploited against lower tier AI. Anyway, on the surface it seems pretty good, but there's a catch. All these choices are not really choices. They are all upgrades that objectively improve your car without any downsides. So unless you want to get the best performance from your car, you won't really be choosing the upgrades. So your cars don't really feel like your own creation. And even so, the amount of choices don't really compare to modern titles. Hell, all the tier 4 cars cannot be customized in any way except for paint or livery. And even so, the livery creator is, let's just say, not great. But considering the optimal experience is inside the cockpit where you don't really see the car, it in the end doesn't really matter that much to me. And I think this is overall how I feel about most, if not all, these downsides the game has. Except for one crucial, and it's the one creating this video title. In 2021, Shift 1, its sequel, and more were removed from all online stores and cannot in any official way be bought. Considering it's 1.5 decade old and its sequel was one of the worst selling in the franchise, it might just be the best racing game you cannot play, and hopefully it won't be forgotten.